Welcome to Two Witness Teaching Program. Two Witness, a Bible teaching program to change and transform people. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Let's dive into it.
So many people who were before Nehemiah also could have audience with Tobiah and be before him. And we're taking the words and the deeds back and forth between the two men. Okay, in chapter 7, the walls are built, the doors are set up. He says, verse 2, I gave my brother Hanani and Hananiah, the ruler of the palace, charge over Jerusalem, for he was a faithful man and feared God above many. They talked about how to keep the gates solid so that men can't get in during a time of darkness when someone might try to sneak in. But what they're seeing is, in verse 4, the city was large and great, but the people were few. The houses were not built. So we have a genealogy of the people that had come out of Babylon, and this is repeated from Ezra chapter 2. This is the same list of people that had come. It goes all the way down through the end of the chapter. All right, and we're going to pick up on that thought in a few more chapters. So the city is beginning to be built and restored, but people aren't yet living there. The genealogies are reviewed. Now, in chapter 8, Ezra is going to read the law before the people. This is what he went there for, was to read the law, to teach the law, to make people to understand the commandments of the Lord as they were given to Moses. Verse 1, all the people gathered themselves together as one man into the street, and Ezra brought the book of the law. Verse 2, Ezra brought the law before the congregation, both of men and women, and all could hear with understanding. He read from morning till midday, and those that could understand and the ears of all the people were attentive to the book of the law. Verse 5, Ezra opened the book in the sight of all the people, and when he opened it, all the people stood up. And Ezra blessed the Lord, the great God. And all the people answered, Amen, Amen, with lifting up their hands, and they bowed their heads and worshiped the Lord with their faces toward the ground. Verse 7 is a list of priests and Levites. They caused the people to understand the law, and the people stood in their place. So they read in the book of the law of God distinctly, and gave the sense, and caused them to understand the reading. It's been almost 100 years since Cyrus made the decree for them to go back and rebuild their temple and their city. And they're understanding now the law. It's being placed before them once again that they would hear it and have understanding of how they should live. Nehemiah, which is the Tirshatha, which is the governor, it's a title, governor, and Ezra the priest, the scribe, and the Levites taught the people. And they said to the people, This day is holy unto the Lord your God. Mourn not, nor weep. For all the people wept when they heard the words of the law. Why would you weep? Well, if you heard the law and knew that you were guilty before the law, and you were under conviction and were repenting, you would be weeping. He said to them, Go your way, eat the fat, drink the sweet, send portions unto them for whom nothing is prepared. For this day is holy unto the Lord. Neither be ye sorry, for the joy of the Lord is your strength. So, although this was a day when people were receiving great correction and rebuke, they were repenting, and they were told, this is a day of joy, this is not a day of mourning. After this, they keep the Feast of Tabernacles, the Feast of Booths. And that was 7 days, verse 18, day by day, from the first day to the last day, he read in the book of the law of God. So we see he's continuing to teach the people. Now in chapter 9, they're reading from the book of the law still, and we see that they're giving the history of Israel. And from verse 7 all the way down to 37, that's one of the key moral government passages of this book. And I think we're familiar with it because what is the history of Israel? If you obey me, you'll be blessed. If you disobey me, you'll be cursed. And so their history is we were burdened by this enemy and we repented and God delivered us. And then after a time, we went into iniquity and God delivered us into the hands of these people. And eventually we repented, God delivered us. So beautiful, beautiful passage. I won't read the whole thing, but it goes all the way down from the giving of the law. Verse 13, he gave them right judgments, true laws, good statutes and commandments. Verse 20, he gave them a good spirit to instruct them. Verse 24, the children went in and possessed the land. But 26, nevertheless, they were disobedient and rebelled against thee. Verse 27, therefore you delivered them to the hand of their enemies. Verse 28, therefore you left them in the hand of their enemies. 30, therefore you gave them to the hand of the people of the land. But, verse 31, nevertheless, for thy great mercy's sake, you did not utterly consume them nor forsake them, for thou art a gracious and merciful God. And let's go down to verse 36. Behold, we are servants this day, and for the land you gave unto our fathers to eat the fruit thereof and the good thereof, behold, we are servants in it. Verse 38, because of all this, we make a sure covenant, we write it, our princes, Levites, and priests seal unto it. So they're going to make a covenant. And then chapter 10 gives us a list of the names of those people who signed it. And this was the law and their agreement to keep and to do the law. Verse 28 at the end, it says, everyone had knowledge and understanding. They clave to their brethren, their nobles. They entered into a curse, or they agreed there would be a penalty of a curse, and to an oath to walk in God's law, which was given by Moses, the servant of God, to observe and to do all the commandments of the Lord our Lord, and his judgments and his statutes. One of them was, verse 30, that they would not intermarry with the people of the surrounding lands. 31 talks about not buying or selling on the Sabbath. And they had trade with the people who lived around them, but they knew they were not supposed to do trade on the Sabbath. Verse 32, we made ordinances to charge ourselves yearly with the third part of a shekel for the service of the house of the Lord. So they're reinstituting what they knew they should be doing to take care of the house of the Lord. There's laws of first fruits. They reestablished the tithe. And again, 39 ends with the promise, we will not forsake the house of our Lord. So these were the priests and Levites and the princes that were entering into this covenant to do these things and sealing it with their names. Now in chapter 11, the rulers of the people dwelt at Jerusalem. The rest of the people cast lots to bring 1 of 10 to dwell in Jerusalem, the holy city, and 9 parts to dwell in other cities. So although the temple was there, the wall was rebuilt, very few people were living in the city. So 1/10 of the people drawn by lot were to come with their families and start to rebuild in the city and populate it and to clean it up so that it could become a prosperous city once again. And verse 2 says there were also those who willingly offered themselves to come and dwell in the city. Now there's a reckoning of the families who came all the way through the end of chapter 11. Chapter 12, the priests and the Levites. And if we go to 12:27, they dedicate the wall of Jerusalem. They have all of their singers here. And we're going to go to chapter 13, the last chapter. On that day they read in the book of Moses in the audience of the people, and therein was found written that the Ammonite and the Moabite should not come into the congregation of God forever. Why? Because they met not the children of Israel with bread and water, but hired Balaam against them, that he should curse them. Howbeit our God turned the curse into a blessing. It came to pass, when they heard the law, they separated from Israel all the mixed multitude. Now, one of the key people, an adversary of the Jews who were trying to do what God had commanded, was this Tobiah, the man that we have been reading about. Well, as far as separating oneself from the wicked, something has to be done about Tobiah. Well, verse 4 says, Eliashib the priest, having the oversight of the chamber of the house of our God, was allied unto Tobiah. He had his loyalties with Tobiah. He had prepared for him a great chamber, the place where they used to lay the meat offerings and the frankincense and the vessels and the tithes of the corn and wine and oil. This place in the temple was given over to Tobiah to live. Nehemiah didn't know this. He had been in Jerusalem for 12 years, at which time he had agreed with King Artaxerxes that he would return to the court, that he would go back to Babylon. This was happening in his absence. Verse 6, and all this time was I not at Jerusalem. For in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, king of Babylon, I came to the king, and after certain days obtained I leave of the king again. So after Nehemiah goes back to Babylon, after a certain time, he's allowed to return and go back to Jerusalem. This is what he finds when he gets back to Jerusalem. I came to Jerusalem, and I understood of the evil that Eliashib did for Tobiah, and preparing him a chamber of the courts of the house of God. And it grieved me sore. Therefore I cast forth all of the household stuff of Tobiah out of the chamber. Then I commanded, and I cleansed the chambers, and thither brought I again the vessels of the house of God, with the meat offering and frankincense. So, separating himself from the world. He sees that the portions were not being given to the Levites and the singers. He starts to rebuke the people and correct them for things that had gone wrong during his absence. Those things they had covenanted to do, they weren't doing just in the short time after they had made the covenant. As soon as Nehemiah the governor leaves, things fall apart. Verse 11, I contended with the rulers. Why is the house of God forsaken? I gathered them together and set them in their place. What else happened? Verse 15, he sees people treading wine presses on the Sabbath, and bringing in sheaves, and lading asses, and wine, grapes, and figs, and burdens, which they brought to Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. I testified against them in the day wherein they sold victuals. So people were working and buying and selling on the Sabbath. Men of Tyre, they brought fish and all manner of ware, and sold on the Sabbath to the children of Judah in Jerusalem. So I contended with the nobles. What evil thing is this that you do and profane the Sabbath? And what he does is he commands that the gates of the city be shut on the Sabbath. So none can go out and none can come in. That stops the trade right there. Verse 32, in those days I saw Jews that had married wives of Ashdod and Ammon and Moab. And we just read back here that they were to be put away from the house of the Lord forever. And here now they're intermarrying. For 24, their children spoke half in the speech of Ashdod and could not speak the Jews' language, but each according to the laws of the language of the people. I contended with them and cursed them and smote them. And I said, you shall not give your daughters to their sons, nor take their daughters to your sons. Did not Solomon, king of Israel, sin by these very things? Yet among many nations was there no king like him, who was beloved of his God, and God made him king over all Israel. Nevertheless, even him did outlandish women cause to sin. Why is it that they couldn't marry the heathen women? because they would cause them to sin against their God by bringing in the gods of wood and stone and things that are contrary to Jehovah God. Verse 28, one of the sons of Joiada, the son of Eliashib the high priest, was son-in-law to Sanballat. So not only was Eliashib allied with Tobiah, he was also allied with Sanballat. And he says, I chased him from me. Verse 29, remember them, O my God, because they have defiled the priesthood and the covenant of the priesthood and of the Levites. Thus cleansed I them from all strangers, and appointed the wards of the priests and the Levites, every one in his business. And for the wood offering at times appointed and the first fruits, remember me, O my God, for good. So we see a righteous man who is following God, obeying God, walking in faith, praying, strengthening the hands of the people to do the work, and it was done. But he couldn't force the people to obey. He comes again, he corrects the people. This is where Old Testament history leaves us. This is the very last chronological book of history. Let's finish our chart on the board and see what's happening. Okay, so it's about a little over 100 years since the decree of Cyrus goes forth. These are the kings of Persia that the empire had been working through. Nehemiah was during the time of Artaxerxes, and after Artaxerxes, there are 5 more kings of Persia until Persia is conquered by Alexander the Great. If you want some historical context, we can see what was happening here. This is the time of the Persian Wars. These are things we know about because we learned them in school. Nobody's going to tell us this half of the chart. They're not going to tell us who Ezra and Esther and Nehemiah were, that were serving God and working in their service toward God during this time. But at the time that the temple was being completed, Darius the First was off in Greece trying to conquer them. But this is the Battle of Marathon. We're all familiar with the Battle of Marathon, and the Persians are defeated by the Greeks right here. Darius had a vendetta against the Greeks. He was relentless in pursuing it, but he was defeated by them. He is slain. His son Xerxes, remember this is the time of Esther. Esther's husband goes and fights the Spartans at Thermopylae. And you remember this? It's like the last stand of the Spartans. And there's a small pass that the Spartans are defending. And it looked like they were going to win it until there was a traitor who had gone and helped the Persians find a way behind so they could also be attacked from behind. Xerxes here, with this loss, we see the Persian Empire begin to weaken. Their power starts to weaken. During the time of Artaxerxes, this is Athens, the golden age of Pericles. These are all things we've studied. But the empire is weakening until King Philip of Macedon conquers Greece. His son, Alexander the Great, rallies the Greeks behind him, and he goes on to conquer Persia. And we see the rise of the empire of what's called Greece throughout the known world. We're starting the book of Esther tonight. We've just finished Ezra and Nehemiah, and this is after the Jews have been released to go back to their homeland to rebuild their temple and their wall during the time of the Persian Empire. And the book of Esther, remember, fits in between the 6th and 7th chapter of Ezra, if you want to make a note in your Bible, just so chronologically you can get an idea of how that fits in. The theme of the book of Esther, to show God's personal awareness and care for his people, covers approximately 10 years. We're going to read, it's from the 3rd year of the reign of Ahasuerus, or Xerxes, to the 12th year of his reign. And purpose. I like this. This tells us a lot. The purpose of this book, to show God's protection for the Jews that did not return to Jerusalem with the first group. How many times did people go back to Jerusalem from captivity that we have a record of? 3 times, right? Once with Zerubbabel to rebuild the temple, once with Ezra, once with Nehemiah, where he gathers them together to rebuild the wall. But you know what? Many Jews stayed in Babylon. They stayed in Susa. They stayed in the places of their captivity, and they continued to prosper there. That's where we find Esther and Mordecai still back in the palace, or near the palace. And we also find the origin of the Jewish feast Purim, celebrated to show the deliverance of the Jews that were still in Persia at that time. No key passages of moral government in Esther. None of that deep doctrine showing great moral choice, but a tremendous book of faith and of God's favor upon Esther for being faithful, and also showing how, I believe, as we've taught many times from Scripture, that God will turn the heart of the king to accomplish his purpose, just like he did with Cyrus to release the captives. So if we go to Esther 1:1, it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus, this is Ahasuerus, which reigned from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces. So this is Xerxes, is who we typically know him as, listed here as Ahasuerus. That in those days, when the king Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan the palace, in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast unto all his princes and his servants, the power of Persia and Media, the nobles and princes of the provinces being before him, when he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his excellent majesty many days, even 180 days, more than half a year, he's throwing this big feast and festival. When these days were expired, the king made a feast unto all the people that were present in Shushan the palace, both unto great and small, 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace, where were white, green, and blue hangings fastened with cords of fine linen and purple, to silver rings and pillars of marble. The beds were of gold and silver, upon a pavement of red and blue and white and black marble. They gave them drink in vessels of gold, the vessels being diverse one from another, and royal wine in abundance, according to the state of the king. And the drinking was according to the law, none did compel. For so the king had appointed to all the officers of his house, that they should do according to every man's pleasure. Verse 9, also Vashti the queen made a feast for the women in the royal house, which belonged to King Ahasuerus. So she's entertaining the women, he's entertaining the men. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, and Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcas, the 7 chamberlains that served in the presence of Ahasuerus the king, to bring Vashti the queen before the king with the royal crown, to show the people and the princes her beauty, for she was fair to look on. But the queen Vashti refused to come at the king's commandment by his chamberlains. Therefore was the king very wroth, and his anger burned in him. Verse 13, when the king said to the wise men which knew the times, for so was the king's manner toward all that knew the law and judgment, and the next to him was Karshena, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, which saw the king's face, and which sat the first in his kingdom, conferring with his princes. What shall we do unto the queen Vashti according to law, because she has not performed the commandment of the king Ahasuerus by the chamberlains? Verse 16, Memucan answered before the king and the princes, Vashti the queen hath not done wrong to the king only, but also to all the princes and to all the people that are in all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus. Now this will be interesting. For this deed of the queen shall come abroad unto all women, so that they shall despise their husbands in their eyes when it shall be reported, the king Ahasuerus commanded Vashti the queen to be brought in before him, but she came not. Likewise shall the ladies of Persia and Media say this day unto all the king's princes which have heard of the deed of the queen. Thus shall there arise too much contempt and wrath. Women are going to show contempt for their husbands. If the queen can do it, I can do it. And so who's going to be full of wrath? The husbands, because their wives are not obeying them. Well, if it please the king, let there go a royal commandment from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, that it be not altered, that Vashti come no more before King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal estate to another that is better than she. And when the king's decree which he shall make shall be published throughout all his empire, for it is great, all the wives shall give to their husbands honor, both to great and small. And why would that be? Fear, because they know if they disobey their husbands, there's going to be a consequence. And the saying pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan. For he sent letters into all the king's provinces, to every province according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language, that every man should bear rule in his own house, and that it should be published according to the language of every people. Well, chapter 2. After these things, when the wrath of Ahasuerus was appeased, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what was decreed against her. Well, then said the king's servants that ministered unto him, Let there be fair young virgins sought for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather together all the fair young virgins into Shushan the palace, to the house of the women, unto the custody of Hegai the king's chamberlain, keeper of the women, and let their things for purification be given unto them. Verse 5, Now in Shushan the palace there was a certain Jew, whose name was Mordecai. He was a Benjamite. He had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captivity, which had been carried away with Jeconiah king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar the king of Babylon had carried away. Verse 7, He brought up, or raised, Hadassah, that is, Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother, and the maid was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took for his own daughter. So it came to pass, when the king's commandment and his decree was heard, and when many maidens were gathered together unto Shushan the palace, to the custody of Hegai, that Esther was brought also unto the king's house, to the custody of Hegai, keeper of the women. And the maiden pleased him, and she obtained kindness of him, and he speedily gave her things for purification, with such things as belonged to her, and 7 maidens, which were meet to be given her out of the king's house. And he preferred her and her maids unto the best place of the house of the women. And so I believe this is favor from God, that even her, as no one, a Jew taken off the street and just put into the king's house, is already given 7 maidens just for herself. 10, Esther had not showed her people nor her kindred, for Mordecai had charged her that she should not show it, so no one knew she was a Jew. Mordecai walked every day before the court of the women's house to know how Esther did and what should become of her. Verse 12, When every maid's turn was come to go in to King Ahasuerus, after that she had been 12 months according to the manner of women, for so were the days of their purifications accomplished, to wit, 6 months with oil of myrrh, 6 months with sweet odors, and with other things for the purifying of the women. So a year just passed in this verse. Then thus came every maiden unto the king. Whatsoever she desired was given her, to go with her out of the house of women into the king's house. In the evening she went, on the morrow she returned to the second house of the women, to the custody of Shaashgaz, the king's chamberlain, which kept the concubines. She came in unto the king no more, except the king delighted in her, and that she were called by name. So she goes into the king a maiden, she comes out a concubine, is basically his routine. 15, when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her for his daughter, was come to go in unto the king, she required nothing but what Hegai the king's chamberlain, the keeper of the women, appointed. And he maybe would have known what the protocol was, what would bring him favor, what would impress the king. So she took what he recommended, and Esther obtained favor in the sight of all them that looked upon her. So Esther was taken unto King Ahasuerus into his house royal in the 10th month, which is in the month Tebeth, the 7th year of his reign. If this is the 7th year of his reign, it's the 4th year after Vashti was sent away. So 4 years just passed between chapter 1 and what just happened in chapter 2. The king loved Esther above all the women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. so that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king made a great feast unto all his princes and his servants, even Esther's feast, and he made a release to the provinces and gave gifts according to the state of the king. And when the virgins were gathered together the second time, then Mordecai sat in the king's gate. So we see he's still gathering women unto the house of the women. We tend to think of him being a king who was very loyal to his wife. Here's a king and a queen, husband and a wife. No, he was a very powerful king who still had a house full of women and a house full of concubines. So he's still gathering women. Well, by now, Mordecai is somehow promoted, sitting in the king's gate. Esther had not yet showed her kindred nor her people, as Mordecai had charged her. For Esther did the commandment of Mordecai, like as when she was brought up with him. Even after she's queen, she's still obeying Mordecai. In those days, while Mordecai sat in the king's gate, two of the king's chamberlains, Bigthan and Teresh, of those which kept the door, were wroth and sought to lay hand on the king Ahasuerus. And the thing was known unto Mordecai, who told it unto Esther the queen. And Esther certified the king thereof in Mordecai's name. And when inquisition was made of the matter, it was found out. Therefore they were both hanged on a tree. And it was written in the book of the Chronicles of the king. So pretty straightforward. Let's keep going, chapter 3. Well, after these things did King Ahasuerus promote Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him, and set his seat above all the princes that were with him. We have no mention of Haman before. We don't know anything about him, just out of the blue here. And all the king's servants that were in the king's gate bowed and reverenced Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence. Well, then the king's servants, which were in the king's gate, said to Mordecai, Why transgressest thou the king's commandment? Came to pass, when they spake daily unto him, and he hearkened not unto them, that they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's matter would stand, for he had told them that he was a Jew. And what I believe this means and why it's written here is because Jews don't bow in reverence to man. So he says, will this matter stand? Haman is a Jew. Does he have a reason not to bow to you, is what I get from this. Does this stand? Well, when Haman saw that Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence, well, then was Haman full of wrath. He thought scorn to lay hands on Mordecai alone. Why just kill Mordecai? They had showed him the people of Mordecai. Wherefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews that were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, even the people of Mordecai. I think we need to understand this. Why did Haman want to kill the Jews? Because they were the people of Mordecai, and he was angry with Mordecai. We don't have any history of any animosity between Haman and the Jews before this moment. Well, in the first month, the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, so now we're the 12th year of his reign. Esther's been queen 5 years now. So 5 years just passed in this chapter. They cast pur, that is, the lot before Haman from day to day, and from month to month to the 12th month, that is, the month Adar. Casting pur, or casting lot, is like rolling the dice. Let's roll the dice and see what comes up. It's like almost like a chance game. Why is he rolling the dice? Why is Haman casting the lot, casting pur? He is casting the lot to determine through the dice or through the casting of the lot what date should he set for the destruction of the Jews. That's why he's casting pur. Verse 8. Haman said unto King Ahasuerus, this is what he says, There is a certain people scattered abroad, and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of thy kingdom, and their laws are diverse from all people, neither keep they the king's laws. Therefore it is not for the king's profit to suffer them or allow them to live. If it please the king, let it be written that they may be destroyed. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the hands of those that have the charge of the business to bring it into the king's treasuries. He doesn't mention the Jews by name here. He just says there is a people who you should not allow to live. He even offers to either cover the expense of doing the business or put money into the king's treasury to cover some of the loss that will happen at the loss of this people and the revenue. The king took his ring from his hand and gave it unto Haman, the Jews' enemy. We don't have any discussion here. We don't know if they discussed it, if he tells them who it was. I would think eventually, once the decree comes out that the Jews are going to be destroyed, you'd think the king would see it, right? So eventually he's going to know who it is and what's happening. Verse 11, the king said to Haman, the silver is given to thee, the people also, to do with them as it seemeth good to do. So it seems the king refuses the silver. Just do it. He trusts Haman. If you think these people should die, then just do it. So the king's scribes were called on the 13th day of the first month. And there was written according to all that Haman had commanded unto the king's lieutenants, to the governors that were over every province, to the rulers of every people of every province, according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language. And in the name of King Ahasuerus was it written, and sealed with the king's ring. It's as if the king were saying it himself. The letters were sent by posts unto all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, even upon the 13th day of the 12th month, and to take the spoil of them for the prey. He is writing this on the 13th day of the first month, that it would happen on the 13th day of the 12th month. So 11 months are going to pass between the decree and the day when people would rise up against the Jews to slay them and take the spoil. The copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people, that they should be ready against that day. The post went out, being hastened by the king's commandment, and the decree was given in Shushan the palace. The king and Haman sat down to drink. But the city, Shushan, was perplexed. Why would they be perplexed? Why would they be surprised and wondering? Because there's no reason for this all of a sudden disfavor against the Jews. What have we done that now our lives are demanded from us? So there was no foreshadowing of this, no way of knowing it was coming. All of a sudden, they see their lives are going to be taken. So chapter 4, when Mordecai perceived all that was done, Mordecai rent his clothes and put on sackcloth with ashes, and went out into the midst of the city and cried with a loud and bitter cry, and came even before the king's gate. None might enter into the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. And in every province, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, there was great mourning among the Jews, and fasting and weeping and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes, sign of humility and mourning. So Esther's maids and her chamberlains came and told her. Well, then was the queen exceedingly grieved. She sent raiment to clothe Mordecai, to take away his sackcloth from him, but he received it not. Well, then called Esther for Hatach, one of the king's chamberlains, whom he had appointed to attend upon her, and gave him a commandment to Mordecai to know what it was and why it was. So interesting, a decree went forth. Esther had no idea. She didn't even know it was happening. Hatach went forth to Mordecai unto the street of the city, which was before the king's gate. Mordecai told him of all that had happened unto him, and of the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries for the Jews to destroy them. That, how much was it? 10,000 talents of silver. He gave him a copy of the writing of the decree that was given at Shushan to destroy them, to show it unto Esther, and to declare it unto her, and to charge her that she should go in unto the king to make supplication unto him, and to make a request before him for her people. So here's the first revelation to anyone that Esther is a Jew. And it's made, it looks like, to the king's chamberlain that was waiting upon the queen. Hatach came and told Esther the words of Mordecai. Well, again, Esther spake unto Hatach, and gave him commandment unto Mordecai. All the king's servants The people of the king's provinces, they know that whosoever, whether man or woman, shall come into the king, into the inner court, who is not called, there is one law of his to put him to death, except such to whom the king shall hold out the golden scepter, that he may live. I have not been called to come in unto the king these 30 days. They told to Mordecai Esther's words. So Esther's saying, this could cost me my life. That's what she's thinking. Well, Mordecai, verse 13, commanded to answer Esther, think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. For if thou altogether hold thy peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And who knows whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? And I think this is one of our key passages. She's saying her first thought is, this could cost me my life. And he said, if you don't go, it will cost you your life. Just because you're in the palace doesn't mean you're going to escape the effects of this decree. Not to mention, we're all going to die. Your whole father's house will die. But I know that God is faithful. If you don't do it, he will bring deliverance from another place, but we will perish. Verse 15, Esther bade them return Mordecai this answer, Go gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise. So will I go in unto the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. So powerful statement here of dying to self, laying down one's life for her people. So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther had commanded him. And this is where, to me, the story gets really exciting, because we see not only God's deliverance coming, but we see really the favor that Esther had with the king. She was never out of disfavor with him, do we see in Scripture at all. So it came to pass on the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal apparel. She stood in the inner court of the king's house, over against the king's house, and the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house, over against the gate of the house. And it was so, when the king saw Esther the queen standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. Well, then said the king unto her, What wilt thou, Queen Esther? And what is thy request? It shall be even given to thee to the half of the kingdom. And let me go back and look. He had 127 provinces covering almost the entire known world. And he loved her so much, and she had so much favor, that he was willing to give her half of it just because she requests it. I think that's tremendous. This is, I think, where we see this thread of a love story going through here. She did have favor of him. He did love her, and he was going to grant her request. Verse 4, Esther answered, If it seem good unto the king, let the king and Haman come this day unto the banquet that I have prepared for him. Well, the king said, Cause Haman to make haste, that he may do as Esther has said. So the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. Well, the king said to Esther at the banquet of wine, What is thy petition? And it shall be granted thee. What is thy request? Even to half of the kingdom it shall be performed. Then answered Esther and said, My petition and my request is, here's the drum roll, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my petition and to perform my request, let the king and Haman come to the banquet that I shall prepare for them, and I will do tomorrow as the king hath said. Now, why she stalls another day, we don't know. Very interesting. But we're going to see in chapter 6 what happens that night, which I think is an important part of the story, before she's able to give her full request. Verse 9, Then went Haman forth that day joyful with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he stood not up nor moved for him, he was full of indignation against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman refrained himself. He knows the day is coming. Mordecai will die. When he came home, he sent and called for his friends and Jerish his wife, and Haman told them of the glory of his riches and the multitude of his children, and all the things wherein the king had promoted him, and how he had advanced him above the princes and servants of the king. Haman said, moreover, Yea, Esther the queen did let no man come in with the king unto the banquet that she had prepared, but myself, and tomorrow am I invited unto her also with the king. So he's feeling pretty good about himself. He thinks he's in favor with the king and the queen. He also feels pretty good knowing that soon his enemy Mordecai is going to be destroyed. Well, let's read verse 13. Maybe he doesn't feel so good about that. Yet all this availeth me nothing, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. So maybe he doesn't even want to wait till the 13th day of the 12th month. Well, then said Jerush his wife and all his friends unto him, Let a gallows be made 50 cubits high, and tomorrow speak thou unto the king, that Mordecai may be hanged thereon. Then go thou in merrily with the king into the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, and he caused the gallows to be made. So he's going to want Mordecai to be hung that very next day. Chapter 6. On that night the king could not sleep. He commanded to bring the books of the records of the chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's chamberlains, the keeper of the door, who sought to lay hand on the king Ahasuerus. And the king said, What honor and dignity has been done to Mordecai for this? And the king's servants that ministered to him said, There is nothing done for him. Well, the king said, Who is in the court? Now Haman was come into the outer court of the king's house to speak to the king to hang Mordecai on the gallows he had prepared for him. The king's servants said unto him, Behold, Haman standeth in the court. The king said, Let him come in. So Haman came in, and the king said to him, What shall be done to the man whom the king delighteth to honor? Now Haman thought in his heart, To whom would the king delight to do honor more than myself? So he's thinking, What would I like to be done? Haman answered the king, For the man whom the king delighteth to honor, let the royal apparel be brought which the king uses to wear, and the horse that the king rides upon, and the royal crown which is set upon his head. And let this apparel and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that they may array the man withal whom the king delighteth to honor, and bring him on horseback through the street of the city, and proclaim before him, Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delighteth to honor. The king said to Haman, Make haste, take the apparel and the horse, as thou hast said, and do so even to Mordecai the Jew that sitteth at the king's gate. Let nothing fail of all that thou hast spoken. And this is just such irony, isn't it? I love this. Then took Haman the apparel and the horse, and arrayed Mordecai, and brought him on horseback throughout the street of the city, and proclaimed before him, Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delighteth to honor. Mordecai came again to the king's gate, but Haman hasted to his house, mourning, having his head covered. How shameful! This Jew who would not bow down to me, I just had to proclaim his honor throughout the streets. 13. Haman told Zeresh his wife and his friends everything that had befallen him. Then said his wise men and Zeresh his wife unto him, If Mordecai be of the seed of the Jews, before whom thou hast begun to fall, thou shalt not prevail against him, but shall surely fall before him. Imagine these prophetic words coming out of the mouth of Haman's wife. While they were yet talking with him, came the king's chamberlains, and hasted to bring Haman to the banquet that Esther had prepared. So the people are fearing the Jews. We see there's already some fear, because enough that his wife is able to say, You will not prevail against them. So chapter 7, the king and Haman came to the banquet with Esther the queen. And the king said again to Esther on the second day at the banquet of wine, What is thy petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? It shall be performed, even to the half of the kingdom. Esther the queen answered and said, If I have found favor in thy sight, O king, and if it please the king, look how humbly she is approaching, if you will do this for me, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. Those were the exact words of the decree that Haman had written. If we had been sold for bondmen and women, I had held my tongue, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage. Or Haman being the enemy, he's not going to be able to offset the loss of the king. I mean, no money brought into the king's treasury is going to be able to countervail or offset really the loss it's going to be to the king if these people are destroyed. Well, then King Ahasuerus answered and said unto Esther the queen, well, who is he, and where is he that does presume in his heart to do so? Who's going to kill you? Esther said, the adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. Then Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. And the king, arising from the banquet of wine in his wrath, went into the palace garden, and Haman stood up to make request for his life to Esther the queen, for he saw that there was evil determined against him by the king. The king returned out of the palace garden into the place of the banquet of wine. Haman was fallen upon the bed where Esther was. She was lounging or lying, and he was pleading for his life. The king said, will he force the queen also before me in the house? As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. And Harbona, one of the chamberlains, said before the king, behold also the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman had made for Mordecai, who had spoken good for the king, standeth in the house of Haman. Then the king said, hang him thereon. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then was the king's wrath pacified. So here we see, finally, Esther coming forth with her heritage. The king now knows that she's a Jew. He knows that this situation is connected between the decree and now her heritage and her people, who are now basically sold to the enemy to be killed. So what was she pleading for? Her life. Chapter 8. It's not over yet. On that day did the king Ahasuerus give the house of Haman, the Jews' enemy, unto Esther the queen. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was unto her. The king took off his ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai, and Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. Just the day before, Mordecai was on the king's horse and the king's robe, wearing the king's crown, being paraded through the streets. So the king was familiar with who he was. He knew he was a Jew. And now he is being promoted. He's been given great wealth, the entire house of Haman. So Esther hasn't finished her petition, has she? Haman's dead. Mordecai's been promoted, but that decree is still hanging out there. Esther spake yet again before the king and fell down at his feet. This is like the next day. She besought him with tears to put away the mischief of Haman the Agagite and his device that he had devised against the Jews. Then the king held out the golden scepter toward Esther. So Esther arose and stood before the king, and said, if it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and the thing seem right before the king, and if I be pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to reverse the letters devised by Haman, which he wrote to destroy the Jews which are in all the king's provinces. How can I endure to see the evil that shall come to my people? How can I endure to see the destruction of my kindred? So we're going to find out, and I think we know from other stories, that the decree made by a Persian king cannot be changed. It's solid. Verse 7, the king Ahasuerus said to Esther the queen and to Mordecai the Jew, behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and him they have hanged upon the gallows, because he laid his hand upon the Jews. Write ye also for the Jews, as it liketh you, in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring. For the writing which is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring may no man reverse. He can't reverse the first one. So verse 9, then were the king's scribes called at that time in the 3rd month, that is, the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day thereof, It was written according to all that Mordecai commanded to the Jews and to the lieutenants and deputies and rulers of the provinces, which are from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces, and to every province according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language, to the Jews according to their writing and according to their language. So imagine, this must have been a lot of scribes writing in a lot of different languages, sending riders out in every direction, just so everyone in this kingdom can understand it. Verse 10, he wrote in the king Ahasuerus' name, sealed it with the king's ring. He sent letters by posts on horseback and riders on mules, camels, and dromedaries. And here's the decree, verse 11, wherein the king granted the Jews which were in every city to gather themselves together and to stand for their life, to destroy, to slay, and to cause to perish. This is what was written against them. They can do this, all the power of the people and province that would assault them, both little ones and women, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. So on that same day, when it was decreed everyone could rise up against the Jews, now it's decreed they can rise up and defend themselves. They can slay their enemies and take the spoil. Verse 12, upon one day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, the 13th day of the 12th month, the copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people, and that the Jews should be ready against that day to avenge themselves upon their enemies. So the post that rode upon mules and camels went out, being hastened and pressed on by the king's commandment, and the decree was given at Shushan the palace. Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and white, with a great crown of gold and a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. The Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor. And in every province and in every city, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decrees came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a good day. And many of the people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews fell upon them. It's only 2 more chapters. Let's see how it finishes. In the 12th month, here it is, the 13th day, when the king's commandment and his decree drew near to be put in execution, in the day that the enemies of the Jews hoped to have power over them, though it was turned to the contrary, that the Jews had rule over them that hated them. Excuse me. The Jews gathered themselves together in their cities throughout all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus, to lay hand on such as sought their hurt. And no man could withstand them, for the fear of them fell upon all people. And all the rulers of the provinces and the lieutenants and the deputies and the officers of the king helped the Jews, because the fear of Mordecai fell upon them. Here's Mordecai the Jew next to the king in the kingdom. Mordecai was great in the king's house. His fame went out throughout all the provinces. For this man Mordecai waxed greater and greater. Thus the Jews smote all their enemies with the stroke of the sword, and slaughter and destruction, and did what they would unto those that hated them. And in Shushan the palace the Jews slew and destroyed 500 men. Now we have a list of the 10 sons of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. They slew them, but on the spoil they laid not their hand. So as they killed, they didn't take the riches that were left behind. Verse 11, on that day the number of those that were slain in Shushan the palace was brought before the king. And the king said unto Esther the queen, the Jews have slain and destroyed 500 men in Shushan the palace, and the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? I mean, if there's 500 just here in the palace, boy, what's happened in the rest of the land? Now what is thy petition? And it shall be granted thee. Or what is thy request further? And it shall be done. Well, then said Esther, if it please the king, let it be granted to the Jews that were in Shushan to do tomorrow also according unto this day's decree. And let Haman's 10 sons be hanged upon the gallows. Okay, Haman's sons are already dead, but they're going to hang them up for the people to see for an example. And I believe that second day of killing would just be to reach those men that had hidden or escaped the day before, still the enemies of the Jews that would be loose and running around had they not been killed because they had escaped. Verse 14, the king commanded it so to be done, and the decree was given at Shushan, and they hanged Haman's 10 sons. The Jews that were in Shushan gathered themselves together on the 14th day. They slew 300 men at Shushan, but on the prey they laid not their hand. So it wasn't about getting rich or gaining wealth. It was about their enemies, overcoming their enemies. 16, the other Jews that were in the king's provinces gathered themselves together and stood for their lives, and had rest from their enemies, and slew of their foes 75,000, but they laid not their hands on the prey. On the 13th day of the month Adar, and on the 14th day of the same, rested they, and made it a day of feasting and gladness. But the Jews that were at Shushan assembled together on the 13th day and the 14th day, and on the 15th day they rested, and made it a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore the Jews of the villages that dwelt in the unwalled towns made the 14th day of the month a day of gladness and feasting and a good day, and of sending portions one to another. And Mordecai wrote these things, and sent letters to all the Jews that were in all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus, both near and far, to establish this among them, that they should keep the 14th day of the month Adar, and the 15th day of the same, yearly. So now it's going to become a yearly remembrance or feast. 22, as the days wherein the Jews rested from their enemies, and the month which was turned unto them from sorrow to joy, and from mourning into a good day, that they should make them days of feasting and joy, and of sending portions one to another and gifts to the poor. And the Jews undertook to do as they had begun, and as Mordecai had written to them. Now verse 24, we see where the name comes from of this feast. Because Haman, the enemy of all the Jews, had devised against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast Pur, that is the lot, to consume them and destroy them. So the very method by which he was using to destroy them is the word they used to name their feast. 25, when Esther came before the king, he commanded by letters that his wicked device which he devised against the Jews should return upon his own head, and that he and his son should be hanged on the gallows. Wherefore they called these days Purim, after the name of Pur. Therefore, for all the words of the letter, and for that which they had seen concerning the matter, and which had come unto them, the Jews ordained and took upon them, and upon their seed, and upon all such as joined themselves unto them, so as it should not fail, that they would keep these 2 days according to their writing, and according to their appointed time every year, and that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, every family, every province, and every city, and that these days of Purim should not fail from among the Jews, nor the memorial of them perish from their seed. And Esther the queen wrote with all authority to confirm this second letter of Purim. And he sent the letters unto all the Jews, to the 127 provinces of the kingdom, with words of peace and truth, to confirm these days of Purim and their times appointed, according as Mordecai the Jew and Esther the queen had enjoined them, and as they had decreed for themselves and for their seed, the matters of the fasting and their cry. And the decree of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim, and it was written in the book. So most of that chapter, well, half of it was them rising up against their enemies. The other half describes the way they were going to remember this every year. Chapter 10, the king Ahasuerus laid a tribute upon the land and upon the isles of the sea. Interesting fact, doesn't seem to be connected to anything, but he's the king. He can lay tribute whenever he wants. All the acts of his power and his might, and the declaration of the greatness of Mordecai, whereunto the king advanced him, are they not written in the book of the chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was next unto King Ahasuerus, and great among the Jews, and accepted of the multitude of his brethren, seeking the wealth of his people, and speaking peace to all his seed.